Hey there, welcome back. This is Chand from studyeasy.org, and today we're gonna check the process how in fact we connect with the database when we are making use of Spring's framework. Now friends, this process is important because no matter you are making use of JDBC or Hibernate or any other technology in order to connect with the database, it is always the same process or a similar process. Alright, so let's get started and let's try to understand how exactly this works. Now friends, when it comes to connecting with the database, there are 4 layers which will come into picture. The first layer is the security layer. As the name suggests, all the security related stuff would be handled by this layer. Now friends, this particular security layer is an optional layer and we will talk about this layer in detail in this particular video tutorial series later down the line. Then it comes the controller. Controller is nothing but where we implement the business logic of the application. Then we have the service layer. Now in this particular service layer, we may implement basic business logic related to data. And finally, we have the DAO, which stands for data access object. And this particular layer is nothing but responsible for communicating with the database. So this layer is the layer where actually we are communicating with the database. So let's check all these layers in detail. Let's get started with the security layer. Now, what is the purpose of security layer? In fact, there are 2 concerns that this particular layer handles: authentication and authorization. Now, what does these 2 terms mean? Let us check the definition of these 2. Authentication is a process of establishing a principal is who they claim to be. Alright, so this is like if you are trying to log in into a application and you doesn't have a proper username and password, then you must not be able to log in into the system. So this is like that only, that only the authenticated user must be able to log in into the application. So all similar type of operations where the authenticity of the user needs to be checked, these kind of operations are done in the security layer. Moving forward, also the authorization is also handled in this particular layer. What is authorization? Authorization refers to the process of deciding whether a principal is allowed to perform an action within your application. For example, the user is a logged in user, but even if the user is logged in, there should be a certain level of authorization. A user, for example, can add a user, but the user is not having access of deleting the user. Moving forward, even the authorization part is handled in the security layer. Now, what is authorization? Authorization refers to the process of deciding whether the principal is allowed to perform an action within your application. Now, imagine a situation that Facebook is developed using Spring's framework. This is just an example. Facebook is not developed using Spring's framework. This is just an example that imagine that Facebook is developed using Spring's framework. Now friends, you can log in into the Facebook, you can upload photos, you can create albums, and you can do various stuff in your profile. Now imagine a situation that you are uploading a photo. You can definitely delete the photo as well. But imagine a situation that you are trying to delete someone else's photo. That is simply not possible because you are not authorized to delete someone else's photo, right? So this is authorization. So all similar type of stuff where we require authorization, where we need to decide the authorization of the principal, all these kind of stuff are also handled in the security layer. So these are the 2 concerns: authentication and authorization. Let's move forward. Then we have the controller. Controller is the place where we implement the business logic, and we already know what controller is. We already implemented a couple of controller like hello controller, and we have also configured the request mapping for these controller. Alright, so controller is the location where we implement the business logic. Definitely controller is a very much required and mandatory layer. Let's proceed further. Then we have the security layer. Security layer should call DOAs and perform business operations. Now DOAs has the methods which will be interacting with the database, and in the service layer we will do some specific business operation which are based on data, and from where we will get data we will definitely call DOA methods in order to get the data. Now friends, service layer is usually little confusing to the people who are new in Spring's framework. Now service layer and security layer are optional layers, where our controller and DAO, data access object, are mandate layers. Alright, so let us proceed further. Service layer. Now let us check this statement. The service layer is there to provide logic to operate on the data sent to and from the DAO and the client. Very often these two pieces will be bundled together into the same module and occasionally into the same code, but you will still see them as distinct logical entities. Are you able to understand anything from this? Yes, this is little tricky, but don't worry. We will check an example which will give you an overall idea why and where and what is the objective of service layer. Now imagine a situation where the information of the user is stored in multiple tables. For example, there are two tables. In the first table, we are storing the user ID, name, and the email address of the user. And we also have a yet another database table which stores the user ID and address. Now we would like to display all the related information on our web page. Definitely we need to access these two tables, right? So how to handle this particular situation with reference to Spring's framework? Let us check. Now when the user information is required by the controller, then definitely the service layer will be coming into the picture. Now this particular service layer will call the methods which will give the service layer the information related to user ID, name, and email address, and based on user ID which the service layer received, it will again call a DAO method for user ID and address, and then finally the service layer will operate on both of these data sent by data access object and then merging or bundling these two information into one, and then finally it will returning an object of user type to the controller. So this is something which would be done in the service layer, where a certain level of business logic would be implemented in the service layer on the data which is provided by DAO. Little confusing, right? Yes, it is little confusing, and even if there is little bit doubt in your mind, don't worry. When we will try to implement everything in our projects, then the things would be more cleaner in your mind. Alright, so let's proceed further. And then we have the DAO, which is nothing but data access object. Now what is data access object? This is a layer that provides an abstract interface to communicate with database. Pretty simple. It has the methods which will be communicating with the database, nothing else. So with this, I suppose I have made myself clear. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.